Good afternoon and thank you. Welcome to this session. This is Accelerating the Digital Transformation. And I'm delighted to be joined by you both, Hassanein and Diana. What I wanted to start off by asking is just the obvious question: what is the key to accelerating access to digital technology? And I wanted to start with you, Hassanein, because you can come with the perspective of running a massive conglomerate.
Thank you very much, Alex. It's a pleasure to be with you today. Listen, we at Axian Group, we are mobile and fixed operator on the continent. We're active in 8 markets. And we see that the key elements to create a digital transformation, you need to have a proper ecosystem composed first of a good regulation, secondly, by skills in the environment, and last, what is very important is to have good networks also. We're here to have a good, proper coverage. Today, what is good in Africa, operators manage to cover 80 to 90% of the countries. So we did a tremendous development over the last 10 years, and we are now totally covered.
And that's the business perspective. And then I wonder, Diana, you as a DFI, you've got to make these investment decisions. What does it look like to you in terms of the keys to the key factor?
So I think the good news is there's actually been a lot of acceleration. Many of you have felt it tangibly, but over the last few years, we've seen 160 million new internet users across the continent. Over the 6-7 years to 2022, we've seen nearly 200 million people who'd never made an internet payment make an internet-based payment. So there's a bunch of good stuff going on. I think the challenge is that's still not enough. So still only 22% of Africans actually regularly use mobile internet services. So, and it's challenging even in parts of Asia. So in South Asia, you're still seeing nearly 40% of the population across Asia without meaningful internet access. So this isn't limited to Africa. How do we accelerate that? I like your ecosystem point, but I think it goes way beyond the operators. So I think you have to, it's a bit like delivering climate finance and scaled energy. If you're missing pieces of the pie, stuff's just not going to join up. So you have to make sure that the cables are landed. You have to make sure you have a fiber network. You need to create hotspots. You need to make sure that your MNOs are strong and they're built on great infrastructure. They need towers. They need all of the equipment associated with that. You need competition with MNOs. We've invested recently in a new operator in Ethiopia. As a result of that, there are 40 million new subscribers with first access. But also the prices of mobile plans for the national operator has come down 70%. So I think there's a sort of competition basis here that's really important as well. And we look to try and essentially make that entire system, and that also includes handsets and devices. It also includes the content ecosystem, and I'd love us to talk about that in a little while. But you've got to make sure that all of those pieces work in a country. You've got no gaps, and you've got enough competition in key areas that pricing is reasonable for people. Because that 20% would go up. If everyone has a handset and everyone has a cheap plan, you saw in India when the huge investment by Mukesh Ambani completely transformed access in the country.
And I mean, there's some overlap between both of you and what you're saying. You both refer to the importance of networks and coverage. You spoke about skills in particular. Is there any one thing that you think stands out? I mean, so for example, handsets. I know, Hassanein, you're very passionate about handsets. I mean, do you think there's one thing in particular you think is a fundamental key that it's really worth doubling down on and making sure that works across emerging markets?
I mean, Diana was saying something that is very important. Today, we don't have any more coverage gap, but we have a big usage gap.
Yeah.
Today, the mobile data consumption in Africa is still very low. Why? Because the cost of a device, when you bring it compared to the purchasing power of African people, we are 3 times higher than the average of the world. So we need to give them faster, better access to devices. What are the solutions? In certain countries, to import a device, you've got custom and duties between 25 to 40%. Secondly, access to financing. I mean, the device is expensive. You must help your customer. And last, the IP cost. Certain devices, you've got IP costs between 15 to 25%. So I mean, we know what are the solutions to crack the model. To crack the model, we need to accelerate in terms of asking the government to stop taxation that is useless on devices. Secondly, we need to support the access with device financing policy. In Tanzania, we're doing device financing since the last 6 months. We're seeing tremendous effect on the market. Acceleration, the consumption of data, penetration rate in rural places. I mean, it's incredible, but we cannot do it alone. I mean, we need kind of coalition. We need to partner with people to support the balance sheet effort that we need to have.
And I mean, I think, obviously we're speaking across the board about emerging markets, but there is quite a heavy focus on Africa here because obviously we have Semafor Africa, but then as well as that, many of these issues are more acutely felt on the continent. Now, one issue that I think is worth us digging into here is that we're talking about an entire continent, and there might be issues around interoperability in terms of software and in terms of regulatory frameworks being different in different countries. You've obviously experienced this as a business. What are your thoughts on that, Diana?
So I think, to me, I think it's a really interesting question about the content ecosystem, because I think handsets are important. By the way, on handsets, I think the bit that we're missing is local assembly. And we invested in Copper, who you heard about just now. They're now producing over 150,000 handsets a month assembled in Kenya. And again, you saw in India the power of having a kind of locally produced device. It's not all the components locally produced, but being able to generate that locally really helps. On the kind of continent, there is a challenge, right? This is an entire continent of many countries, many of which are not huge in terms of population. So I think you have a gap in terms of both the app ecosystem and content. You see with something like YouTube, the incredibly compelling importance of local language and locally relevant content. So I think thinking about new ways to try and stimulate the content ecosystem across the continent would be helpful. From an app perspective, it's how do you get apps that work across the entire region? So WhatsApp's fantastic, it works globally. But if you're trying to drive something like TikTok, which we know creates really compelling usage, how do you create that content ecosystem? How do you get things that are relevant both in individual countries and more broadly? So I'd love to see a little bit more discussion about the app ecosystem.
Do you have any answers on how that can be done?
So I think what you haven't seen is people investing at scale across the continent. You see individual small-scale apps within country. I know Liquid were trying to create, I can't even remember the name of the app now, something that was a social app that had broader regional relevance. But I think there's space here for entrepreneurs, particularly people who have relevant health content or weather content. How do you try and scale those across at least East Africa, West Africa?
And again, you mentioned scale, and this is something that I think applies to both of you. In terms of scale, when we look at transformative digital technologies, for example, AI, a lot of this is energy intensive. So I know with Axian, you have data centers. That requires a lot of energy. So what considerations are you factoring in terms of that energy consumption? I mean, is it an issue for you? Is it difficult? How are you working around this?
So, Alexei, we're going to be very honest.
Please.
Of course, we've got the challenge of the energy because for the moment we were questioning, is our energy green enough? But I would say, let's be serious. In certain places, in certain countries, where we're operating, we do not have energy at all.
Yeah.
So green or not, we don't have energy at all. So I mean, okay, first we'll try to make. The second challenge we have when we're talking about energy, the needs are growing absolutely. But one important point after the reliability of energy is that when our people doing and working around that, the skills gap is huge. So this is one of the important points after the energy access, etc. Skill is very important. We're seeing that there is a big gap in skill. Third point is the government should accelerate in terms of creating all those talent pool, all those universities to push this digital literacy. And the fourth and last point in terms of challenge that we're seeing, Alexis, is, I mean, there is a great opportunity to develop e-administration, digital ID, and this will unlock a lot of things around the digital transformation. But still, we're lagging because, and exactly as Diana said earlier, in terms of common effort, common transformation program, scalability is not there yet.
And are you seeing, are there any countries that you think are actually doing a good job of what you were talking about in terms of, say, electronic administration, the use of biometric technology, for example? I mean, are there any best case examples you can point to?
Yeah, we're seeing in certain countries, in Rwanda, we're seeing that they have achieved good digital transformation by bringing digital ID programs. In a country where we're operating in Togo, the Ministry of Communication has done tremendous effort to have a direct access to all of the citizens via digital ID program, etc. So this is starting, and it is enhancing the program, the development of the countries in terms of digital literacy, digital transformation. But still, we need to be much more ambitious. And there is so much to do. We've got great example in India. I mean, everybody are aware of that. And we should do the same in Africa, because in terms of financial inclusion, in terms of digital inclusion, those are, I mean, common goals we should have all together.
And Diana, on the same energy question, this is a different perspective, because as a DFI, you have clean energy commitments, and as Hassanein pointed out, well, vast swathes of the continent has struggled to have basic access to power. There's an entire debate, isn't there, around gas as a transition fuel. What are your thoughts? Like, how do you factor that into your investment decisions?
So for us, everything we invest in is Paris aligned. So we care deeply about emissions. But I think, again, here it's about building local solutions. We've invested additional investment in Liquid Telecom to help build their data centers. This is about building local data centers with renewable power. In most parts of Africa, the places where you're going to build data centers, you can build a solar farm around that data center and actually create locally available power. So for me, it's the combination of renewable energy and local data centers that's going to make a difference.
Okay. And I also wonder, is there a danger that Africa as a continent, African countries are going to be left behind in the AI revolution because they're starting from so far behind? We spoke earlier, throughout the day we've been asking people about this. We spoke to Sim Shabalala from Standard Bank, and he pointed out that something like $3.4 trillion will be needed to just get the continent to where it needs to be. So to what extent do you think there is a danger of the continent being left behind? I mean, maybe I'll start with you, Diana, and then to you, Hassanein.
So there's always a risk, but I'm pretty optimistic about this. I mean, I think the benefits of AI vastly outweigh the disadvantages. And I think what we're seeing is AI's potential to really help optimize power grids, to help optimize electrification across the continent. There's an ability to really try and change the level of efficiency around this. So to me, it's just a question of making sure that data center availability is there, because that is critical in the AI space. And that people start having capable devices that they can use, and that there's local content. One of the challenges with AI is all the content it's trained on is English language content. So when in a kind of another life, I had to think about launching AI foundation model trained on other languages, Japan is fine, India is fine, Spanish is fine, but actually when you get into other languages, the content isn't super deep. So I think you then need to think about translation of content. So there is an effort required to make local language capability available in the AI space. But if you have the infrastructure, that just takes some thoughtful initiatives at local level.
And Hassanein, your thoughts on that? Thank you very much.
Alexi, I totally agree. Of course, there's a big risk that Africa stays behind for AI. But let's face facts. What are the priorities for the moment? Yeah. Priorities, we should focus on bringing the key of digital transformation to Africans. And the key of digital transformation, help them to get access to devices, help them finance the devices. First, we've got a usage gap. We are only at 20%. That is the first step in terms of priority. Second step, help them to get the proper skills, have proper university, proper institute. Third, have a very accelerated, innovative regulation. And last, then, of course, AI I mean, the large language model about which language, et cetera, is going to be key. But I think let's go in order. And for me, the risk is that if we don't get access to the devices, it's going to be very problematic to everybody.
Thank you both for your time. We have to leave it there, but it's been great to speak. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.